An agenda is different from an intention. When we have an agenda, we are not focused on how we want to show up or what we want to bring to the experience. When we have an agenda, we are focused on either making something very specific happen, or we're focused on making sure someone is going to do or say something very specific. And if what we want doesn't happen, we get disappointed. When we show up with an intention, we have openness, curiosity, and we're noticing the journey.
I don't like to argue, so I say nothing and fume for days.
How do I set boundaries without sounding like a jerk?
I hate the idea that I might accidentally offend somebody, so sometimes I'd just rather say nothing at all.
Welcome to the Language Alchemy Podcast, and thank you for joining me today. This is your host, Alejandra, a transformative communication teacher and coach who's devoted to helping multicultural individuals and couples on the path of transformation transform their lives and relationships through conscious communication. Thank you so much for being here, especially because this week, the Language Alchemy Podcast is turning 2 years old. I am so grateful to you and to all the people who have contributed to the podcast. From my communication students and coaching clients who asked me to have a podcast, to my beloved Matthew, who helped me from the start by helping me figure out all the equipment I needed for professional recording, who weekly makes sure the house is quiet and the cats are not pounding on my office door as I record, who listens to my ideas that I want to put out there on the podcast and also suggests contents and shares articles of interest with me, and who's also one of the voices in the intro. And I'm also grateful to my 2 friends, Caroline and Tara, who agreed to record their voices for the intro. And I'm thankful to my musician friend, Gary Lapeau, who through his meditation practice composed the music for the podcast. I'm also thankful for Anna from the podcast space, who helped me launch the podcast, come up with a structure, a concept, and to all my assistants, Sam, Anne, Trish, and Rebecca, who have helped me promote the podcast on social media, to Hivecast, who edits the podcast and produces show notes and sound bites to share on social media, and to all the people who have been guests and let me interview them for the interview episodes, and to all the listeners who send me questions, emails, direct messages, and comments on Instagram and Facebook, and let me know what they love about the podcast, what they're working on thanks to the podcast, or request communication topics for me to address. And last but not least, I'm so grateful to you. You are contributing to the podcast right now. You are contributing by listening for the next 15 minutes, by sharing the podcast with others, and by applying the transformative communication tools I share with you in your interaction with others. My heart is filled with gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My mission is to bring forth transformation and healing to our precious and diverse human family by using language consciously and with a clear understanding that we can bring more peace, more love, more equity, and more connection to ourselves and others through the way we communicate. And you listening here right now, you are helping me in this mission. And I want you to know that you are not alone. You have me. And you also are accompanied by thousands of people in over 30 countries who listen to the podcast every week. So once again, thank you. And now for this 2nd year anniversary episode, I have a thought-provoking one that's also a practical episode. I am going to share an important transformative communication tool, and I'm going to leave you with some homework for you to experiment with it. This episode is about 2 concepts we tend to use interchangeably when in fact they're very different. And what are these 2 concepts? These are intention and agenda. In this episode, I'll tell you about communicating with an intention and communicating with an agenda, and why it's important for you to be crystal clear about them. Because when you confuse these two concepts in your communication, you can cause yourself unnecessary disappointment, frustration, helplessness, or you may even believe that you're not enough, that you don't have the capacity to communicate skillfully, and you can also cause unnecessary conflicts. So let's look at these two concepts. Intention and agenda may seem similar because they're both about considering what we'd like to have happened in the future or how we'd like things to go. And whether we're aware of this or not, we're constantly thinking about what or how we want things to go. For example, when you go on a date with someone, you want things to go well. You want a second date. When you have a job interview, you want to get that job and maybe hear the words, "When would you like to start?" So these two concepts have some similarities, but they're not the same, and you need to know the difference. Let's break them down. If you belong to a so-called conscious community and participate in conscious activities such as yoga, mindfulness, meditation, or other awareness and transformative practices, you frequently hear the word intention. Many yoga teachers start their class with the instruction to generate an intention for the class. Some intentions during the practice of yoga may be to listen to your body, to connect to your energy, to be aware of your breath. Similarly, when you listen to a guided meditation teachers often ask you to consider your intention for that meditation sit. You may hear suggestions such as having the intention to be present, to deepen your awareness, to welcome whatever experience you're having. Now, if you're a practitioner of any kind of conscious practice, you know what a difference it makes to have an intention. It's very different to show up to your mat or your cushion and try to follow instructions than showing up to your daily practice with an intention about how you want to show up during that time on the mat, on the cushion, or wherever you practice. And now that you're clear about what an intention is, let's talk about an agenda. An agenda is different from an intention. When we have an agenda, we are not focused on how we want to show up or what we want to bring to the experience. When we have an agenda, we are focused on either making something very specific happen, or we're focused on making sure someone is going to do or say something very specific. And if what we want doesn't happen, we get disappointed. When we show up with an intention, we have openness, curiosity, and we're noticing the journey. But when we have an agenda, we have no openness, no curiosity, and we don't enjoy or even notice the journey because we're just driven by pursuing and achieving a particular goal. Now, let me give you an example of what it would be like to have an agenda in your communication. I'll never forget when I attended a 2-day workshop facilitated by one of my teachers, Marshall Rosenberg, who created nonviolent communication, also called compassionate communication, and wrote many books about it. At the workshop, a participant asked Marshall how to communicate with his teenage son about collaborating to the household by doing his chores. Marshall offered a wonderful teaching with great examples. The next day, the participant raised his hand and told Marshall that whatever Marshall suggested sounded really nice the day before, but that it didn't work. When Marshall asked him what happened, the man said, "Well, I asked my son to take the garbage out just like you suggested it. And guess what? This morning, the garbage was still in the kitchen." This is a typical example of an agenda. When we have an agenda, we want something very specific to happen. and we have little to no consideration of the other person or the context. So if the other person doesn't do what we wanted them to do, or if whatever we wanted to happen doesn't happen, we get discouraged, disheartened, dissatisfied, or angry. And instead of setting ourselves up for conscious communication, we are getting the ground ready for disappointment. Often, when people start working with me in a transformative communication coaching program, they believe they have communication intentions, when in fact, what they have are agendas. For example, Alejandra, I want to learn to be more assertive in my communication with my boss so that my boss gives me a promotion at the end of the fiscal year. So can you hear how that is an agenda? Having an intention would be, I would like to be more assertive at work and be able to communicate with confidence when I have an idea, when I have suggestions, when I want to give feedback, when I need to give directions, or when I receive feedback. But in this case, being more assertive in their communication is an agenda. And if they just work on being more assertive to get that promotion, there's no guarantee that they're going to get that promotion. So that agenda will lead to disappointment. So now that you know the difference between an intention and an agenda, I would like to encourage you to extend the practice of generating intentions to your communication and not just leave them on the yoga mat or on the meditation cushion. Having an intention when you communicate is one of the most powerful habits you can develop because having an intention sets you up for conscious interactions. And to deepen your understanding of intentions, let me share about the etymology of the word intention. The word intention is from Middle French. It actually comes from archery, and it means to stretch yourself. When you have an intention, you think about how you want to show up in that interaction, and as you are interacting with the other person, you keep your intention in mind, and you keep stretching into that intention no matter how the other person responds or reacts. When you are doing that, you are engaging in conscious communication. Let me give you some examples of how I work with intentions in my own daily life. Last week, I went to visit a friend, and my intention was to be open, generous, and to listen. A couple of weeks ago, I got together with a group of friends I only see once a year, and my intention was to be curious, authentic, and compassionate. This morning, my mom and my sisters had scheduled a conversation on WhatsApp. I knew this conversation was going to be about sensitive topics. So before I logged into the conversation, I generated the intention to listen, to be loving, and open-hearted. So now that you have some examples of how I generate my intentions, I am going to leave you with some homework because I'm sure you'll be talking to people. So for the next week, once a day, just once a day, generate an intention before you talk to someone. And if that day you're going to interact with several people, choose one interaction or choose one person. Just do this once a day. And to keep you accountable, I'd love to hear from you how it went and what you noticed. If you're on my mailing list, you have my email and you can email me directly. And if you aren't, you can sign up for my mailing list by going to languagealchemy.com. And every Wednesday, you're going to receive an email with transformative communication tools that you can put into practice right away. In these newsletters, I also share with you what I'm reflecting on and what I'm working on in my own communication. And I give you content that you will only find in my newsletters, nowhere else. And now let's recap what you've heard in this episode. Today, we talked about intention and agenda in your communication. I clarified the difference between having an intention and having an agenda in communication. I gave you examples of both. I explained the etymology of the word intention. And in the end, I left you with a task to generate an intention once a day before you interact with someone. And if you're noticing that when you are communicating with others, you don't know how to fulfill your intentions, or you can't connect to having intentions, or after this episode, you're now aware that you have been experiencing disappointment, discouragement in your relationships, despite all the conscious practices you engage in, because your habit is to show up with an agenda and not with an intention, then reach out to me and let's talk about the possibility of having transformative communication coaching for you. At this moment, I have 2 spots for new communication coaching clients. You can reach out to me via email if you have it, via Instagram by sending me a direct message at Language Alchemy, or by visiting my website, languagealchemy.com. Thank you so much for listening. A special thanks to Britt and Sam for appreciating the topics of the last 2 episodes. Thank you to all of you who have emailed me and sent me messages congratulating me for my commitment to deliver a podcast episode every week for the past 2 years. Until next week, when you and I embark on the 3rd year of the Language Alchemy podcast. And as we say in Argentina, ciao, ciao. Original music by Gary Lapo. You can find all links in the show notes at languagealchemy.com.